Welcome back to Retrieving Sanity, a podcast where we dive into the depths of mental health one laugh at a time. I'm your host, Keegan, and I'm here to talk about everything from anxiety and depression to self-care and finding joy in the everyday. Because, let's face it, life can suck, but we don't have to navigate it alone. Retrieving Sanity is a partner with Podcast for Prevention, an initiative from Start Day 1 that aims to prevent suicide and promote mental health awareness. Together, we're working to break the stigma and create a more supportive community. So, grab a cup of coffee, sit back, relax, and let's retrieve our sanity together. Hello, and welcome back to Retrieving Sanity, and today we have a very special guest, and we don't really know what to introduce her with, so I'm just kind of going with recovery engineer, and that would be Crystal Robinson. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Keegan.
Of course. Thank you for being on the show. I read a little bit of one of your books, and it was chapter 22, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But
actually, it's volume 22 in the change. So I have a chapter in this. It's an anthology of multiple authors. It's insights into self-empowerment. So it's all stories of resilience for all different walks of life, from everything from health challenges to, potential suicide to being at rock bottom and then becoming successful. There's some great stories in here, some amazing authors, and my story, The Catalyst, is in here regarding my health challenges and how I overcame them.
Gotcha. It was super empowering just reading that little bit. I think it was 6 or 7 pages. But wow, that was super strong stuff. And I've got to say, thank you for just pushing through all of that and being able to be here today. But could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how old you are, what you do, or just kind of what I'm talking about, or what you talked about in The Catalyst?
Yeah, so I live just south of Boston in Massachusetts. I am 51 years old. I'm a wife, a mom, as you said, recovering engineer. I was an engineer for 34 years. I guess I will always be an engineer. I culminated as a vice president for the past 17 years. I cut down my hours to create this business 2 years ago after kind of coming to the realization that my life was living for somebody else. I was living as an engineer because it was pushed on me. It was something I was good at. I was good at the science. I was good at the math. It came naturally, but it wasn't something I always wanted to do. And I just kind of ended up there because, your parents push you. People say you're not going to make money doing other things. Very creative person, very personal person. I love to talk to people and be with people. And the engineering kind of wasn't that. I was just good at it. I was great at creating teams and working with my team and working with my group. And I really enjoyed the science behind it and all of that. But I feel like I was very suffocated in that role. Going through my health challenges and what's in The Catalyst is realizing over the past few years that this has been happening all my life, that it had started as childhood, that I'd had all these traumas that were weird medical conditions, sexual abuse, harassment, bullying, all of those things that we all kind of live in throughout our childhood and our young adult life. But the medical things really kind of popped in a lot. And it got to a point where in my 30s, I started having anaphylactic shock reactions to foods that I was never allergic to before. It was my body kind of yelling at me because I wasn't doing the emotional, mental, spiritual work. And I didn't realize that. I didn't realize my body was telling me that. I just listened to the doctors. They were saying, well, you can't eat this anymore. And that's what you do. You just listen to, the higher ups, what they tell you to do because they know better. And I went through kind of a rock bottom where I went into the hospital numerous times in 1 year and got to the point where I was there for a whole week because of the epi and the doctors giving me medication to stop the reaction, stop my throat from closing, that my heart was going crazy. And they put me through all kinds of heart tests and put me on a monitor, and I thought I was going to die. And my kids were young. My kids were, in school, and they were in elementary school, and I was so afraid of leaving them. I was so afraid of eating anything or doing anything. I felt like I was just numb. And I guess I could say you have a nervous breakdown. Like I couldn't work, I couldn't eat, I couldn't function, I couldn't be a mother. And they ended up putting me on medications to just function. And when you're on those type of medications to relieve the anxiety, relieve the panic attacks, relieve all that, you're stagnant. You're not you're not whole. It like shoves you down. And it took me a while, to kind of get through that. It took like 6 months for me to just realize like, this isn't really where I want to be. I don't feel like me. And I jumped into things that fulfilled me, yoga and dancing. I did ballroom dancing just on a whim. I thought, oh, this will be fun. Let me do this. And it lit me up. It was the catalyst in the right direction. And it helped my body. And I saw a holistic nutritionist that helped with me with my foods and understanding kind of how my body was reacting to foods and how to work with that and kind of that holistic side, which was completely different than I was getting from the Western medicine. But later on, as I was dealing with that and seemed to have solved that, I ended up with lupus. It was more medical stuff that was happening. And I didn't know what it was. The doctors didn't know what it was. It took years for them to figure it out. They were like, oh, maybe it's rheumatoid arthritis. Maybe it's this. I would get pain in my hands. I couldn't lift things. I get pain in my body. I got rashes and all these things happening to me. And they couldn't really explain it until I got a sun rash, which was the lupus rash. And that's when they said, well, that's what it is. And then they just add to the medications. You're on all of these autoimmune medications to shut down your immune system, which makes it even harder for your body to thrive. And I got worse. I got worse as the medications were on me. And it took me some time to live outside of the identity that you get with a diagnosis. Any type of diagnosis, it kind of creates your identity. You're living that. So I was living as a lupus warrior. That's what I was. And I didn't want that to define me. It took me a little bit to kind of come out of that victim mentality that we end up in, that hole. We go into that. Oh, okay, this is what I am. This is what I have to do. This is where I'm going to live. And I finally realized, I can't dance like I want to. I can't live like I want to. I don't want to just be confined to not being able to be in the sun, not being able to live the life I want. And I started exploring more holistic, more opportunities, meditation, other healing modalities, and really understanding that it was all of the stuff that was going on in my body was based on all the things I had suppressed in my mental and emotional health. Right? I wasn't living for me. I was just shoving it all down to be what everybody else wanted me to be. Not using my voice, not telling my stories, not living the things that were authentically me. And that finally culminated in me finding out years later, after I had solved the lupus, and they say it's not curable, but I say, well, I cured it. But I ended up with a brain tumor out of nowhere. And I didn't even know that it had been growing in me all those years. And it got to the point where when I found out about it, it was like, it has to come out right now. You're having micro seizures. You're going to have a massive seizure. You need to have it removed. It was bigger than a golf ball, and it was behind my left eye. And, I was having balance issues and maybe some headaches here and there. But in this society, I think we just ignore those things. We're like, oh, I'll be fine. Oh, I'll just, work out more. I can't balance well because my muscles aren't as good as they should be. But no matter what I did, I was still having those issues, and I just wasn't listening to what my body was trying to tell me throughout all this process. You'd think going through the anaphylactic shock and the lupus that I'd start listening to my body. Well, I think the brain tumor was like, here, wake up. This is the last thing. We're giving you this because you could die. And I think that's what really awakens people. It changes what you look at. The fact that I knew that they were going to open up my skull, go into my brain, and take this out, and we didn't know if it was cancerous or not until they removed it, and luckily it was not. and I was able to heal from it. And I didn't come out, I came out okay. Maybe some memory issues here and there, and just, being able to heal from, that invasive surgery. But I went in with a great attitude because of what I had already done. And I think that was why I was so successful in healing from it. But it also changed everything. It flipped the switch. I was woken up to, I was living a life that wasn't authentic to me. And my purpose was to help people heal the way I had, to start using what I had learned and adding to my modalities to teach others to do the same. So I worked with the same holistic nutritionist that I had worked with for 10 years, learned his methods and started using those. I learned energy healing and started using those. I got certified by the Deepak Chopra group as a total well-being coach in meditation teaching and health and wellness coaching. And then I got certified on the national board as a health and wellness coach to help people use nutrition and lifestyle changes to get away from medications and come back into them. And that's what I do now. So that's kind of a nutshell of my story.
Wow, that is very packed full of a whole bunch of stuff, and it's just really inspiring too, because you're here helping other people through difficult times now, and you walked through things that just seemed, well, not just seemed, but were life-threatening, and you're over here on the other end of everything with a big old smile, and it's just awesome.
Yeah, those things, people could say you could be upset that those things kept happening to you. And I said, well, they didn't happen to me, they happened for me. They shaped me to who I am today and what I can offer the world.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you have that mindset, because I've learned in myself that it's that perspective shift. Instead of why is this happening to me, it's what can I get out of this? And it really changes the whole game on what happens with everything, because whenever I sit there and let things happen at me, it's taking away my power in an instance, and not only that, but it's dictating everything for me. And I think that's the big part. It's telling the story for me, and I don't want that anymore, So I've had to kind of change the script in my own ways and stuff, but how have you changed the script for yourself whenever you first started going through these life-threatening conditions and stuff? Because I know for myself, I'm allergic to a bunch of foods, and so I know that whole feel of I've got to watch what I eat. And it was kind of funny because whenever I was young, I would always be picky about my food, and I just didn't know how to tell my parents, besides it didn't make me feel good. And whenever I was in high school, I had to go through all these medical treatments, and I got allergy testing done for the first time, and everything I didn't like to eat I was allergic to, and my parents just sat there and they were like, "We're so sorry. We just thought you were a super picky eater." And so I know that like a shift like that in my life had just flipped everything on its head. I had to watch what I eat, and it made me sit there and kind of a little paranoid of sorts, kind of like you did. So how did you first start flipping the script? How did you first start flipping your perspective on things?
I think at first I wasn't as, pulled down by it. At first I was just like, okay, I can manage this. I'm just going to pull all this stuff out of my diet. I'm only going to eat these things. But I am one of those people that's like, go big or go home. Like when I go into something, I'm all in. And it was just literally anything that was even close to one of the things I was allergic to wasn't even in my home. And which could be too drastic, right? And it gets to the point where you feel like you're limiting yourself unnecessarily. And I think that was part of it. Like I would put myself in that mental hole of, the anxiety behind, well, if I eat that, it could kill me. Or the anxiety behind, well, I'm taking away all these things that I love, and what do I love about what I eat? Like I remember being in that place and getting through it. It really got to the point where I got down to going back to loving to cook, because I love to cook, and really like creating things that were great without the things that I couldn't have. And learning to love those things and realizing that it didn't define me based on the things I couldn't eat. Or like if you go out with people and people are having pizza, I couldn't have pizza. I also have a condition where I can't, it's called celiac disease, where I can't have gluten. And dairy also really bothers me based on that. I'm not allergic to those two things, but that adds to my allergies, which is soy and peanuts and tree nuts, which adds to the gluten in the dairy. So I don't eat pizza. I can't have the dairy or the crust. And like people go out and have pizza. Well, what do I have? I have a salad, or I have something like that. And it got to the point where I was like, oh, well, I'm not like one of everybody else. It really took a while for me to figure out, well, I'm actually eating healthier. This is my body's way of making me better by teaching me that I can't have those things because they're not good for me. And then watching people around me eat like all of those things that are so bad for them all the time, and ending up with diabetes, or ending up with high blood pressure or high cholesterol or chronic conditions. And I ended up with chronic conditions, but they weren't because of what I was putting into my body. They were the things I weren't letting out. It was the mental and the emotional struggles that were manifesting as illness in my body. And
that's crazy that the body can do that kind of thing, because that is what dis-ease really is, because that is what the word is. So how did you start handling your dis-ease?
I definitely had to go within and find the things that brought me joy. That was the first thing, the dancing. That was my first step. Really doing something for me instead of living my life just based on what everybody else wanted. Taking care of my kids, doing the after school activities, working, being a career mom, climbing that corporate ladder, being a good wife, being a good, daughter, all of those things that you get caught in. And you realize you're just not living a life that's present. You're living a life that's for everything else. Like people expect you to have this perfect family, this perfect home, or this perfect car, or whatever that is. And it took me a long time to start figuring out this isn't me authentically. Right? To peel those layers off and figure out, well, what am I? Right? And when people ask that question, it's huge. It's a huge question. And for the longest time, it was just I was a mechanical engineer, or I was a vice president. Like that defined me. And I realized that didn't define me at all. It just showed that I had the perseverance to climb that ladder, to do that work. Really, that's it. That's one piece of me. That's not all of me. Like all of me is, I care about myself. I love myself. I am worthy. I can pull into my energy. I can meditate. I can connect with guides. I can help other people and feel non-judgmental and be positive and work in this beautiful life. I can be happy. I can be healthy. I can love every day. And that's a process. It's not something that you can just flip a switch.
It is very much a process. How did you start about that process, though?
I think most of it was, like I said, the dancing was the beginning. Finding something that brought me joy, that I couldn't think about all the troubles. That was the first step. After that, it was really like opening myself up and questioning everything in the medical community. Being curious, really curious, and opening myself up to holistic types of healing, to energy healing, and connecting with those things, to really read about all the things that happens with the mind. I started getting my hands on as many self-help books as I could get. I started listening to multiple podcasts that had all these different healers on them. And if I resonated with one of the healers, I would buy that person's book and then read that book and learn more. And it was just like I couldn't get enough information. I just kept pulling in the information. And I think once you start, then you realize, well, when I'm uncomfortable, that's when I need to push through and drive.
Yeah.
When I'm uncomfortable and I pull back, I'm suppressing. I'm not growing, I'm not learning, I'm not being.
I love that. And it is something that I've learned in my own recovery. And it's something that, I'm not going to lie, it'll piss me off sometimes. Because I'll come up to a situation, or I know that there's about to be conflict, and it may not necessarily be bad conflict, but just conflict, and it makes me uncomfortable. And so I'm sitting there, and my first instinct is to take that step back, because, you know, as a guy, I was taught to be happy, angry, hungry, and horny. You know, every other emotion had to be suppressed down, for the most part, and I didn't know what to do with them. And so, essentially, sorry, my brain just went all sorts of sideways.
That's okay. This is the way the brain works.
But with that, I digress. What was I saying?
Well, we were basically talking about how you felt uncomfortable and that we weren't driving through, right? And I think that's something that we all find. And you did the right thing. You stepped back, right? Most people don't. They react. And that's what causes confrontation. That's what causes problems, because they're reacting to the situation. And I knew I was there too. A woman working in a male-dominated field that was constantly trying to prove herself. I always never felt worthy. I was always reacting. I was always, you know, pushing to prove myself, as opposed to just stepping back and knowing that I could handle it and breathe and then think and then react. Instead of reacting, you're responding. And you were already doing that, but as you said, you were suppressing everything else.
Yeah, and now that the train caught back up, it's because the way that society is for not just males nowadays, it seems to be for everyone. We have to bottle everything up, and we can't really express ourselves authentically. And it does seem that a lot of issues come from internal stress that just builds up over time, traumas that build up over time that go unresolved, and different dramas that compile on everything else. And it seems that we're able to actually take care of a lot of this stuff ourselves. It's just that we need to figure out the tools. And that's what you did, is you went and you found all the tools because, like you said, you got curious about stuff. So real quick question, what is your favorite modality? What's your favorite way of healing yourself and or others?
Going within.
Going within?
Meditation, going within. And the way that I define meditation as a meditation teacher is different than what you would think many would. You don't have to sit down and have a certain pose and think a certain thing or not think anything. You can literally take a walk, go out into nature. You can put your headphones on and put on your favorite music. You can literally just stop and take 10 breaths and maybe stop and say, okay, what are all the thoughts in my head? Let's go through them all. That's also a form of meditation. Meditation is anything that helps you come back into you. And that's what you were talking about, the way society puts all this pressure on that we have to be a certain thing and not show any emotion, not show, you know, how we are. And coming back inside, you can, okay, I hear you, brain. I hear what you're trying to tell me. You know, whether you're catastrophizing or you're calming, you can be all of those things. Like people say you have the two things on your shoulders telling you this and telling you that. Well, actually thinking about those things and working through it in your brain, that's also a form of meditation. Thinking, deep thinking. And sitting back and letting your subconscious brain come in and be like, no, that's a little crazy. You're kind of going outside of where you should go. And maybe you should come back here. Maybe this is what your heart's telling you. And just because such and such says this, maybe you should follow this. And I find that modality is what opened up everything else for me. Being able to sit in quiet, or when I had anxiety, put on certain music, or to literally go take a walk, step away and collect my thoughts I think that's the first step for anybody.
Yeah, that does sound like that would be the first step. And I'm a huge fan of meditation myself. So my second question is that for myself, I know that it would take a lot of confidence to change up everything that I've been doing, to express myself authentically, to be able to not shove everything down into this little bottle, so is that kind of what happened for you? Did you have to build up confidence to express yourself, to start dancing, for instance? Or did you just kind of throw everything into the wind and just say, let's go?
Yeah, I think it depends on what it was. Like, I did jump in, like go all in, go big or go home. When it came to the dancing, I did jump in, and it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm just going to try it. It doesn't feel right, but I'm going to do it anyways. And it was just opening myself up to that. But that wasn't working through the emotional things. That was, a little bit going through the uncomfortable. So it was a beginning, but working through the emotional things and the things that you shove down is really having conversations, with people that are willing to listen, whether that's a therapist, a coach, a good friend, a family member, really just like walking through stuff. There's stuff that I revealed in my chapter in The Change that literally was just published a few months ago, that nobody else in my life knew except for my husband. So there's like this stuff that we do still hold inside. You're constantly going to be analyzing things and processing things and figuring out, does this serve me? Is this a limiting belief? Am I holding this back because I'm afraid of what people are going to think? It's really coming down to that. I think, doing what they call the shadow work or the mirror work, and figuring out those things that you can question. What are my core beliefs? Really defining what those core beliefs are. And then what are these other beliefs that I have? And are they limiting? Are they changing me? And are they changing me for the better, or are they holding me back?
I love that.
I think that's really important.
Yeah. And those beliefs are really what will help define future actions, for myself and what I do for others. And I think that really does kind of all go back to that introspection, because if I don't know who I am, then what can I produce for the world? And so I think that also goes back to you talking about taking all those layers off. To me, it's like taking the labels of layers off, the layers of labels off. There we go. And really defining yourself. And it's kind of not like putting a label to yourself. It's more like building a statue for yourself, I guess, because it's never really quite complete, I'd say. I would never say I'm really quite complete, because I'm always figuring out new stuff about myself. And so I figured that you'd kind of experience the same thing. You've gone through this healing process, and you've not had just one big thing happen. You've had a bunch of things happen. And so each one has had its own learning curve, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, I agree with you saying that you're kind of building your statue. But for me, it was like creating that foundation to ground me into me. Where I was so living outside myself, right? I wasn't inside. I was outside. I was, next week, next month, next year, or this happened to me, that happened to me, this happened to me, right? It was all in the past and all in the future. I wasn't present and grounded in the here and the now. And I think having life-threatening situations happen to you, or like questioning your life, puts you more in the present. Where that's where you can be solid in your foundation and ground yourself. Okay, what's important to me? What makes me me? And not what other people think I should be.
Yeah.
I think that's really important, where you're pulling all that back in. Like, the past, I can't change. I can only take the lessons from it with me. And have I processed those things enough to have the lesson and forgive myself for being through that, and forgive those that maybe caused it? Like, I heard this numerous times from a couple of yogis that I've followed that you may not be responsible for the wounds, but you are responsible for your healing. So you're responsible to take the reins, plant your feet, be present, process all of that past emotion, not worry about the future, but have a vision. This is what I want. This is where I want to be. This is where I am now. This may be helped structured where I am, but it doesn't define me. How do I get here? What's my first step?
Yeah.
And as a coach, that's what I do with people.
Fair enough. I love that though. And one of the things that I know a lot of people have questions about is, what do you mean by I don't let the past define me, but it helps structure me? Because a lot of people confuse the two. They say, aren't they the same thing? Because the definition is the structure, or the structure is the definition. But that's not necessarily the case whenever it comes to defining the past, right?
Right. Just like I said about like the lupus. Like I'm a lupus warrior. Does that define who I am? Or an engineer. Does that define who I am? Or a, survivor of sexual abuse. Is that define who I am? No. It's a piece of me that molded me, and I had to process and learn from. And it makes me who I am. Like I said before, all these things, happen to me or for me, right? Yeah. And what I learned from them helped structure that foundation. And some of that foundation, which could be limiting beliefs, I no longer need. Your core beliefs are like the rebar, right? That's in the statue. But the clay or the bricks, they can be changed.
Yeah.
Right? Those beliefs come and go. What I believed 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago is not what I believe now. Right? And those experiences helped shape where my core beliefs are now and where my limiting beliefs are. And if we look at our childhood, all our beliefs are structured by our parents, and those are around us. And they're not ours.
Yeah, they're really not. And I know one thing for myself, that whenever I've started defining my own beliefs, and kind of like you said, how 10 years ago those beliefs aren't the same that you have today. Well, it's kind of the same for myself. As I've defined my own beliefs, I found that they don't necessarily line up with what I've believed in the past, and part of me has felt almost like a hypocrite, because it's kind of like, hey, that doesn't feel right, because I didn't just think, I believed this, but now I believe almost or the exact opposite of. And it's kind of like, how does that work? How does that happen? But it happens through experience, because that's the best way to shape a perspective, in my opinion.
A lot of times we make opinions or beliefs over stuff that we never even experienced.
Yeah. And I think that kind of plays into what happens to me a lot of the time, is the opinion of what happened to me, not necessarily what happened, but my opinion of what happened. So
I think that pulls right into like that victim mentality that we end up in, right? That woe is me, or this is me now, or this happened to me, and I'm gonna be, shame, blame, all of those emotions that we end up putting on ourselves, and it's really hard to shed them. It is, and it's that's what I think the growth is learning to shed those things. Like I talk about in the book, that I was in this male-dominated field and dealing with sexual harassment and biases on a regular basis. And it got to a point where I would just pretend I was naive. I pretended I didn't understand what was going on and just ignored it, even though I knew exactly what was happening. But I was conditioned to not understand that it wasn't okay. Being a woman in that field, I just had to deal with it. So, okay, I'm just going to ignore it and just pretend it's not happening. And even if it's blatant, right? I think that's like our inner safety mechanisms happening. And it wasn't until I started talking about it to people close to me and really describing the situations and having them say, yeah, that's not okay. And like when the Me Too movement came out and all of these people started really talking about it and understanding, oh, this is illegal. that I was just like, oh, so I was dealing with something. Oh, so I'm a little at fault that I dealt with it for so long. Right? Like going back, okay, I'm going to have compassion for myself for the fact that I dealt with it. And then I'm going to understand that, you know, I didn't pull myself out of it because I didn't know any better. So I'm a little to blame.
Yeah.
Not mostly, but a little. And I think that's a hard place for people to get to. Because they want to stay in the victim. And it's really hard to get there. It takes a lot of work, a lot of processing, a lot of talking, a lot of thinking, and really like looking at it from the perspective of the person that maybe caused it. What are they dealing with? What did they grow up with? What did they go through? Why are they that way? Why did they do this? Like, then you're like, oh, well, wait a minute. Like, we're all screwed up in one way or another. Right?
I totally understand that. And I have a moment of something similar whenever I was in rehab and I was talking to my therapist. I suddenly had my aha moment because I was like, I can't be mad at my parents, you know, for everything that they did whenever they were raising me, because one, if whenever they were 29, the age I was in rehab, and they had 3 kids and everything, and I was single, well, divorced and in rehab, like, and I'm still getting my crap together. Like, what does that say about like my parents? Like, they're still getting their crap together, but they weren't doing bad, you know. And so it kind of made me sit there and go like, I can't be mad at them. They were doing the best that they could with what they experienced and everything that they knew. And it kind of started, I think that was probably the day everything started flipping around for me, because it really did start to flip the script. It started going like, oh, hey, let's look at like my parents' perspective. What was their upbringing like? And it kind of was able to reflect in everything that I could see where they were coming from. And I could then understand why we'd have these butting of head moments, you know.
I did something similar, very similar with my parents, and like their situations and the growing up, and I think that's culture normally just wants to blame your parent, right? And that's what makes it really hard to be a parent too, because you're like, I'm gonna get blamed for everything that's wrong with my kids. And I have adult kids now, so I do that. I go back and I'm like, oh, what did I do, right? But like you said, thinking about from their perspective, where were they? What were they dealing with? What were they conditioned like? What were they groomed into? What was the generational stuff that was still on them? What were they running away from? What were they hiding? What were they suppressing in their lives? And I did that a lot with my mom and my dad. And I really learned a lot of stuff about myself and them when I did that. I think you're right. It's a flip the switch moment. And if you can do that with all of the things you're blaming, you will be surprised at how calm and resourceful you become.
Yeah, it is really interesting how calm and resourceful someone does become in recovery. And it's just awesome too, because in working recovery, sometimes it makes other people want to do the same thing, you know. And so that's what I see happen with like my father, for instance. I noticed that he was getting better, and I don't know if it was because I was in rehab trying to get better as well, or what, but after some conflict happened not too long ago in my family, he had actually called me to tell me that he was sorry for everything that had happened in the past. And of course, the list is probably too long, and there's no recollection of everything that happened. But he was just saying, like, hey, like, I hope you can forgive me for the things that I hurt you on. And that just kind of opened up the door even more for healing, because it's like, hey, there's those moments where it's like, I don't know if I can remember that necessarily, but I know that the avenue of forgiveness is there. And I think that that's another thing, is that being willing to forgive and see those kind of things. And a lot of people aren't willing to give up that victimhood mentality. So
Yeah.
So how does someone break out of the victimhood mentality, though?
It's hard. It's hard. We like living there, right?
Yeah.
We do. We like shoving it all down and covering it up with alcohol, food, drugs, whatever it is, shopping. Like, we all grab something to cover up how we feel. And I think you have to want to be better. You have to want to be something else to come out of it. If you love being in the blame shame game, you're not ready yet.
Yeah.
But if you're watching something like this or listening to something like this, there is something in the back of your mind that wants to know more, that wants to start questioning, that wants to start going, well, maybe I'm not the victim. Maybe this doesn't define me. So then it is, reach out, find a coach, find a social worker, find a therapist, find a friend, start talking, start processing, start figuring out what your beliefs are, what your core beliefs are, what your limiting beliefs are. Start finding out what your purpose is, what you really want in life, and stop living based on your past.
That's awesome. And, it's interesting. I just had a weird thought pop in my head, like, if my mother needed a life coach, because she listens to the podcast, and so she's in that same boat. She's trying to better herself, and she also has celiac. So it'd be interesting, because that's an experience that not many other people have, but it does take that desperation of wanting to change. And I think a lot of people don't want to give up that little bit of pride that comes with, ooh, look, I have a label. I have a little label. But whenever all is said and done and you start defining yourself, what were some of the things besides core beliefs and things like that? Or is that really what defines someone? What is it that defines you, if you had to lay it out for someone like the audience, to describe yourself in authentic terms? How would that look like?
Yeah, I think that is the process, trying to define you. Right? That's the ultimate goal of figuring out, what's my purpose? Why am I here? What am I meant to do and be? What are the beliefs that shape that purpose? What are my superpowers? What are my resources? What is great about what I've done and what I do? How have I persevered? Right? Those are your superpowers, no matter what you've been through. I've heard some great stories. I study with Elliot Connie, who's a psychiatrist who teaches solution-focused brief therapy. And he has had some amazing stories of people that he's worked with that were in, the worst cases, and finding out the resources they use to get through those and how they can better themselves using those resources in a different way. And ultimately doing that mindset work where you're connecting your mind, your body, and your spirit, and deciding that you are worthy of incorporating these things into your life. What you put in your body, what you listen to, what you surround yourself with, all of those things make you you. Are you surrounded and putting in all the things that you really don't want?
Yeah. I like that. That's really strong, because it does really tie into the mindfulness of what one puts into their life. And I think you touched on it earlier, how you were kind of on autopilot. And that does really ring the bell with me, because if I sit there on autopilot, I just wake up, go to work, wake up, go to work, wake up, go to work. And there's not really much else in between. But whenever, say, the podcast, for example, that is, unfortunately, it's become part of the personality, but it's not like who I am, but it is a part of me. And it is also turned into a way of expression, which has turned into a way of healing, which is, in a weird sense of the way, helping others heal, because they hear my BS, which for some reason helps, but they get to hear other people's stories, and they get to hear people's stories like your own, and it gets to create this atmosphere that just really creates authenticity, you know. And I'm sorry that was kind of a ramble.
No, it wasn't. There was all kinds of great tidbits in there. And I remember when you were previously talking, there was something that came to me, and I was like, I want to make sure that you and your audience understands this. You are whole. No matter where you're at in your life, right? You're at rock bottom, you're, in recovery, or you're still not even close to it yet. You are whole. You are a whole human being. You're full of emotions, you're full of thoughts, you're full of life and energy. And once you start to understand that, nothing else can take pieces away from you. You are not half, you are not broken. I know you see like memes for this stuff all the time, right? But it's true. Until you actually adopt that and connect in with yourself, then I think you will be constantly looking for validation outside.
Yeah.
And we all do. Like, I find myself doing it, but then I'm aware, and I'm like, oh, why are you going there? You don't need validation. You just don't need to do that. Yeah.
I'm guilty of doing the validation thing myself, and I think it's just natural, right? It's kind of the whole, I need that mirror of a sorts. I need the outside perspective that I'm doing right, because I've been conditioned for so long that everyone else's idea of right is right. So
right. Yeah, that's true. And it's like I said, it's a process, and when you feel like you're kind of there, you're not really there. You're just constantly working through it. You're just more aware of, I'm seeking validation outside of myself a lot. Okay, I'm aware of this. Why? Right? Yeah. Somebody gives you a present that you maybe don't like. You stick it on a shelf so that person sees that you have it, and you validate them. But you don't want it there. Right? Yeah. This is a form of conditioning. We do this. Or we get asked to go to a specific event. Maybe it's a family event. Maybe it's a friend event. And we go out of obligation. Not because we want to. Right? These are the things about like figuring out what your beliefs are and your boundaries and starting to honor them for you. Because going to that event doesn't define you.
No.
Right? And if you don't go, it's not going to change. It's almost like the whole life and death thing. Like tomorrow, if you're gone, people will grieve, but we will move on. If I passed away during the operation and moved on to the next life, or whatever you believe, people would grieve. It would change people's lives that were really close to me. But that's it. Life would go on. So once you realize that, I think you live more authentically. I think that's why the whole life and death scenarios are like what wakes people up. They're like, well, then what am I living for? Like my legacy is going to be more that I helped people and I felt happy with myself. Most people on their deathbed are so upset that they didn't do the things they wanted. and they did things for others
Yeah.
that others wanted, right? They weren't doing things for others that they wanted to do. They were doing things for others because it was expected of them.
Yeah. And
So, go to your grave or your deathbed or to the next life or whatever you believe, feeling like you were authentic and you lived the life that you really wanted to live. Because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that really does give me the urge to tell people, if you're afraid of losing people just to become yourself, then they're not worth keeping,
Yeah, relationships, right? Exactly. Are they authentic?
Yeah.
Or are they just what you expect them to be?
Or is it just the idea of what you expected, Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to deal with that uncomfortable truth either. But it really does just look like it's all going back to defining oneself. So
Yeah, coming back into you.
we are nearing the end of this episode, unfortunately. So do you have any words for, well, actually, let's see. Do you have any social links real quick?
I do.
Awesome.
My company is Crystal Moon Holistic Healing.
Ooh.
So you can find me online. I have my own website, Crystal Moon Holistic Healing. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And on LinkedIn, you'll find me under my name, Crystal Robinson. You can connect with me there. I offer coaching programs. I offer group programs. I do speaking engagements and workshops. If you're interested, reach out. Let's talk. Let's see if I can help support you become who you want to be.
Awesome. And for those that were listening, what is the book again? I did forget.
It's called The Change,
The
Insights
Change.
into Self-Empowerment. This is volume 22.
Okay.
And if you reach out to me, you can get my cover with me on the cover, and I'll sign it for you.
Oh, sweet. So those out there, be sure to check out her links. Be sure to reach out to her if you want an autographed copy. And I mean, it's been an amazing conversation, and there's so many more bunnies that we can chase, because recovery is just all sorts of wild, and trying to define oneself and do that inner work, do those meditations, and then not only that, but finding ways to express it on the outside, to express oneself authentically. That's a whole other process. I mean, I'm still learning all of that myself, and like I said before, I think it's something that I'll continuously do for the rest of my life. But it's also thanks to people like yourself that makes this kind of work possible, because without people sitting there and helping other people get better, then other people don't get better, So thank you for all the work that you do for anyone and everyone. On behalf of them, I thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking with people, and it's my purpose to be the guiding light for others, to inspire them to change, to live authentically, to come back into them. And so I'm really honored to be part of this. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much.
Of course. But with that being said, may I ask, can we see you on Retrieving Sanity in the future?
Oh, sure. Bring me back anytime. We got lots of topics we can talk about.
Sweet. Sounds good. Well, I appreciate you very much. And to all the listeners out there, thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity. And this has been Crystal Robinson. So check us out next week. And until then, Crystal, do you have any last words?
Be creative. Be curious. Question everything. And make sure you step back and take a breath before you react.
I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Crystal, very much, and we'll talk to you later, okay? All right. So that was Crystal Robinson. Super awesome conversation. I can't wait to speak with her again. and you should be able to check that next time. So I believe our next conversation is sometime in March. So be sure to check that out. Check out retrievingsanity.com. Go to Spotify to check out the full episode selection. And also don't forget to check us out on YouTube, because we also have videos up on YouTube. But thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity on WDJY 99.1 FM, and also wherever you listen to this podcast. But I just want to also say, if you or a loved one is suffering from suicidal ideations, be sure to call 988. It is a suicide hotline. It's free. There's going to be someone that loves you, that cares for you, and wants you to keep your light in this world. So please give that number a call. If we can teach our children, call 911. We can teach our loved ones to call 988. So with that, I just want to say once again, thank you to listening to Retrieving Sanity. I'm your host, Keegan, and we'll see you next time. Shalom.